In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
If I saw a burning bush, I'd put it out. Wouldn't you? Fire's dangerous. It can hurt you. It can become uncontrollable and spread. So off to get a hose or something to scoop some dirt on it, or maybe a tarp to try to smother it before the lawn or your house or the forest starts blazing. Of course, I'd be in a hurry and probably would not notice if the bush was not being consumed, because you just assume that was happening and nobody bothers to check and see if something impossible is happening. And even if I did notice, my first instinct would be to not believe my own eyes. I'd seek some reason, like I'm having a hallucination. But who knows, maybe my curiosity would get the better of me and I'd stop and stare in awe and wonder, how could this be possible? But part of me would want to run away. An unburnable bush defies nature, understanding, explanation. Better to get a safe distance away, because who knows what might happen next. And if what happened next was a voice coming out of the bush claiming to be God, I might exclaim, "Jesus Christ!" And the voice would reply, "Close, but not quite." And then I'd yell, "God Almighty!" And the voice would say, "Bingo!" "But watch how you use my name there, young man." It's hard to imagine what that would be like or how we might respond, but it's worth thinking about. God may be past that whole set a bush on fire but not consume it thing. However, like Moses, God does come to us often in unexpected ways, and God does summon us to stand on holy ground with reverence and to listen and obey, and sometimes God tells us to do strange and risky things, just as he did with Moses. Of course, Moses is a special case in so many ways. As an infant, he escaped death thanks to his clever mother. After a short cruise on the Nile River, where somehow he was not eaten by crocodiles, he was rescued by a princess and raised in the opulence of Pharaoh's palace. Later on in life, outraged by an overseer whipping a slave, Moses killed him and ran away from Egypt. And now, here he is, settled down, minding his own business, herding sheep out in the middle of nowhere, when God shows up in a pretty flashy way to get his attention. And it worked. Moses said, "I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the bush is not burned up." Brave man, that Moses. He stopped and turned aside and looked and wondered why. Why is this happening? There's got to be some meaning behind it. Moses believed that the voice he heard was real and belonged to God. And then he took the sandals off of his feet. And if you've ever injured your foot, you know it does not take much. Our feet are among the most vulnerable parts of us. But he took off what protected his most vulnerable part, and he listened. But Moses did not like what he heard. "Go to Egypt." I'd really rather not. That's the gist of how Moses responded. "You don't want me. And what do you want me to say? God sent me to free you?" Nobody's going to buy that. They'll reject me. And God said, tell them, I am who I am sent you. And Moses answered, I am who I am. So you're Popeye. Okay, Moses didn't actually say that, but he might have been thinking it. Nobody can rule that out. He might have been thinking it. The conversation continued well beyond the point in the story that we heard earlier. God gave Moses a staff as a sign of power, gave him a few clues about the nasty things that were going to happen if Pharaoh did not let the people go. And Moses tried to wriggle out of the job anyway by saying, I'm just not a really good public speaker. God said, fine. Aaron can do that part. God just was not going to give up on Moses. Now, we might think that God went after Moses because there was something really special about him, that Moses bore some rare intrinsic quality that made him the only attractive candidate. But no. God chose Moses because God wanted Moses. And that's all there was to it. Moses was special only because God chose him for a mission to deliver a message to Pharaoh, let my people go. And with all due respect to Moses, and I'm a big fan, God really did all the heavy lifting with the plagues and the frogs and the turning the Nile to blood stuff. Now, it is highly unlikely that God would call any of us to help him set free an entire nation of slaves. Though, as we've seen with that strange bush, anything can happen when God gets involved. God does set things on fire, metaphorically, in an attempt to catch the attention of people like us who are busy, overwhelmed with data and stimuli, overscheduled and distracted. Maybe our burning bush is a disturbing dream that nags at us, or a sense that something's missing in our life, or that we've forgotten something very important and we just can't seem to remember. Maybe it's a stray thought that flits through our minds and we can't get rid of it. Or maybe it's somebody else who says or does something that sparks our imagination and curiosity. It could be almost anything. But whether we see it as a blessing or as a curse, God is very resourceful and always keeps all of his options on the table. When that fire appears, we may be too preoccupied with our to-do list to really notice. Or sometimes we see it out of the corner of our eyes and think, well, that's not my problem, let somebody else handle it. But if we do stop and stare, our first reaction may be to put the fire out, to hose her down or smother it before it spreads and threatens to consume the things that are most valuable to us. We know how dangerous fire can be. We've all been burned. It's useful at times, but definitely a force we want to control, not something we want to let run free. And if we do stop to see the fire and let it be, we might hear a voice. And I think that deep down we know that. We know that if we push the pause button on our loud, go, faster, faster lives, if we even do that for 5 or 10 minutes of silence a day, then God's voice will come through calling us to remove our sandals, or whatever it is that we use to protect our most valuable parts from God. On the one hand, we crave that voice. On the other, we fear it, because we know that God helps us, but in the process of helping us, God also messes with our minds. And we'd really rather he didn't. But no matter how hard we try to push God away, he won't let go. We can ignore or deny him. We can abandon God, or we can pretend to love and obey him. We can try to tame God, and I think that's the default setting for most of us. Turn God into a teddy bear that we squeeze tight when we're scared, or think of God as kind of a Santa Claus, a vending machine of grace there when we need it. But God's not having any of that. He just keeps coming, setting stuff on fire in hopes of inspiring us to greater things, to godly things that really matter and make a difference. So we need to be ready to give up. Not only is that the right thing to do, but it's easier. We get tired, God doesn't. And we need God more than we know. We bump into so many surprises in life, so many unexpected situations, and a lot of them are not pleasant or helpful or meaningful. And to a certain extent, we cannot escape that. Maybe we are sick of change, of things we don't understand or can't control. But when change comes from God, when God surprises us with the unexpected and the mysterious, we need to jump on that, because when that stuff comes up, we're facing the grace that saves. We're facing grace that saves when we stop and notice and stare at the sacred flame of God. We're facing grace when we reverently remove whatever is protecting what is most vulnerable about ourselves so that we can connect more fully with God. We're facing grace when we listen and accept the call to go forth full of faith in God's power and goodness. And none of it has to do with pre-qualifications. None of it has to do with special innate abilities that we presumably possess. God can and will work with whatever material is available. In fact, he seems to like it that way. Apart from Jesus, the most prominent people in the Bible are a rogues gallery. Remember, Moses was a murderer. Peter's courage crumbled at the crucial moment. Before Paul was Paul, he was Saul, a fierce persecutor of the church, and King David. Well, let's just say when it comes to the 10 Commandments, he had a losing record. So I think for the most part, we're okay. We're okay. The opportunities that we have left lying in the wilderness because we felt afraid or unworthy. A part of our Lenten discipline is to reflect upon and regret the times when we walked by the fire or put it out, the times when we didn't listen or listened but did nothing. But that's only part of our Lenten discipline. We lament the no, but we repent with a yes that seeks God. He's looking for us. And so as we look for him and he looks for us, we're bound to bump into one another sooner or later. We need to watch carefully and see and wonder, to listen and give in and let go, to accept the call and embrace the adventure. But be aware, we are being sent to Egypt. Lovely place, nice pyramids, but full of slaves who need to be freed. And Pharaoh will not let go of them easily. Now, you don't need me to repeat the shameful litany of the injustices of our world. Children go hungry in a land of plenty. Refugees fleeing from rape, torture, and murder. While the wealthiest nations in the world say, "Go home," when those nations know full well they have no home. A go home that's often based on the color of the person's skin, or the content of their creed, or the inconvenience of the cost of keeping them alive. Now, some people might think you're getting political in the pulpit, and I appreciate that concern. But a man named Moses was sent down to Egypt with a demand from God for Pharaoh that he let thousands upon thousands of very valuable slaves free. If that's not political, I don't know what is. Jesus was crucified by the Roman Empire for sedition. Paul got his head chopped off for the same reason. Their executions were political. Empires don't tend to kill people unless their ideas challenge the status quo. The biblical prophets are intensely political, speaking harsh truth to kingly power and wealthy elites. We cannot isolate a section of reality from God and declare him irrelevant to a given situation, because God owns it all. But what on earth could we possibly do? These problems are big and complicated, and that's true. But they are not too big or complicated for God. So when we ask, what could we possibly do? The answer is whatever God tells us to do. And that may involve a serious change in how we view the world and how we interact with the world. We need to look and listen prayerfully to discern our call, because the specifics vary for each one of us. For example, some people feel called to divest from their portfolios companies that they see as causing harm. Several years ago, I liquidated a position at a loss because I learned that the company made landmines, and I did not want to benefit from that. Your call from God might be quite different. People work in food banks and in soup kitchens. People serve as political advocates, writing letters and emails, making calls, social media posts, organizing nonviolent protests. The list of what God might call us to do is nearly endless, which means that there is something that each of us can do to help bring God's justice into the world. There are fires burning. Fires of war, pestilence, and famine. Fires of greed, bigotry, and apathy. Those are not God's fire, because those fires consume and ruin and maim and kill. God's fire gives life and healing and purpose to us and to all who choose to stop and see and listen and wonder. God's fire reveals a voice that guides and leads people and sends people to Egypt or to wherever the poor and oppressed cry out to God in misery. And the faithful go. They go with God's promise, I will be with you. The faithful say, here I am, as Moses did, and go, declaring the presence of the power of I am who I am.